Secrets of the past are hidden in plain sight across the world. You just have to know where to look. For example, the secret handbag of the gods that have been spotted in ancient sculptures worldwide. There are certain things that connect all of humanity hidden in architecture, math, art, and religion, including the bucket and the hat. The bucket and cone. I know that by now you've heard of the Anunnaki. They were the ancient gods of Mesopotamia. And by Mesopotamia, I mean the Assyrians, Sumerians, Babylonians, and all the kingdoms in between. From the Tigris to the Euphrates, the Anunnaki were the supreme deities of early civilization. But they were so much more than just gods. The ancients believed the Anunnaki had come to planet Earth from their own planet far away in the cosmos. They came to the realm of humans to bestow upon them knowledge and to advance civilization. The most exciting theory is that the Anunnaki were aliens. This would mean the very first pantheon of gods worshipped by humans were in fact extraterrestrials. There isn't any irrefutable proof that the Anunnaki came from outer space. There are small tidbits of information here and there that allude to it, but nothing concrete. The Sumerian king list is an ancient document which claims the first rulers of Sumer were deities who lived for hundreds of years. The list details lifespans very similar to the lifespans of characters in the Old Testament. Then there's the bucket and the cone. The Anunnaki were frequently depicted as winged genies throughout Mesopotamia. It was the Assyrian Empire who created the majority of reliefs showing the primordial gods in the form we recognize them today. They had wings like angels and animal heads, but they also had their hands full. In many of the artistic representations of Anunnaki, the deities are holding what looks like a handbag or a bucket in their left hand. In their right hand is a pine cone. Historians and anthropologists can't agree on the purpose of the two objects. The bucket was likely a representation of supreme knowledge. Some scholars think it was a symbol of the profound wisdom given to humanity by the gods. There are also several written records that suggest the bucket may have been part of a ritual of purification. The pine cone would have been dipped in the bucket of holy water, then shaken onto a person to purify them. It's called a theory for a reason, though. If the pine cone was used as an ancient means of purification, why is it all over the Vatican? The pine cone is one of the most frequently seen symbols in the Roman Catholic Church. The Pope's hat kind of looks like a pine cone. His staff has a pine cone on it. There's even a giant pine cone standing outside the Vatican. And nobody knows what the church's pine cone truly means, nor what its connection is to the Anunnaki. Could it be evidence that the church knows more about human origins than they admit? How to marry a ghost. It's no secret that in today's modern world, loneliness is something of an epidemic. If you're having a hard time finding love, you might consider marrying a ghost. It's one of the strangest ancient traditions that's still happening in real time. Not only in the rural corners of the globe either. Ghost marriages are happening right now in modern France. In India, primarily in Kerala, there is a traditional custom known as Pritha Kalyanam, or marriage of the dead. When somebody dies before they're able to be married, local belief states their spirit will be restless. To help the spirit find peace, those who can't find a partner will go through a ritual in which they bind themselves to the unwed spirit. It's killing two birds with one stone. The marriage ceremonies are not big and bold, which is why most people have never heard of them. A family will represent a dead relative using a doll or an effigy. Then that effigy is married to a real, breathing human at a discreet ceremony. It's not a widespread tradition, but it is still practiced. It's been going on since at least the 17th century BC. Chinese ghost marriages were a thing over 3,000 years ago. It wasn't just out of the goodness of their hearts, though. In ancient China, it was believed that if somebody died before they could be married, they had nobody to spend eternity with. The lost spirit would grow restless and haunt the living. Marrying a ghost was a way to prevent hauntings. It also prevented unwed people from going into the afterlife alone. They believed their ghost spouse was waiting for them. In 2021, Vice did a report on afterlife brides. There is supposedly a whole criminal underworld dedicated to robbing graves and pillaging tombs, all to supply rotten bodies for corpse weddings. The vanished Persians. 2,500 years ago, an entire army drowned in the raging sea of western Egypt. Perhaps you've heard this story before, but there is new information I want you to hear. For those who don't know the story, let me do a quick recap. Persian ruler King Cambyses sent an army of 50,000 soldiers across the western desert to attack the Siwa oasis. They wanted to destroy the temple of Amun and slaughter the oracle. Why would the Persian ruler want to do such a horrendous thing? It was because the priests and the oracle refused to legitimize him as the rightful ruler of Egypt. Cambyses sent his army into the desert, but they never arrived at the oasis. They reached El Karga on their 7th day, which was a smaller oasis, but then they ventured out into the restless sandstorm and were never seen again. The mystery has always been that since 500 BC, nobody has ever found a piece of evidence that the army existed. It was hard to believe that a real army of 50,000 soldiers could vanish without a trace, until now. Archaeologists have discovered bronze weapons and silver treasure in a desolate part of the Sahara Desert. These ancient weapons had been hiding in plain sight under the sand. They've been here the whole time, but nobody had ever seen them until now. Some bones were found as well, hundreds of them scattered across the region. This amazing discovery was not made by a couple of amateurs. Two top Italian archaeologists were behind the find. Angelo and Alfredo Castiglioni are big names in the world of archaeology. They were the brothers behind the discovery of the Egyptian city of gold called Berenike Pankrysos. Nobody does desert discoveries like these two. They've been looking for the lost army since 1996. Now that they've found human remains and real weapons, though only a few, not 50,000 soldiers worth, but they believe the mystery is finally solved. All that's left is to confirm the bones as belonging to Cambyses' army, though that's proved tough. The discovery was announced in 2009, and there hasn't been an update yet. The brothers originally said the lost army is hidden under about 16 feet of sand. Mysterious Vault B. In the Indian state of Kerala, the same place I mentioned earlier where people are getting married to ghosts, there is a breathtaking temple. It's a place of holiness and divinity, but beneath is an epic mystery. It's called Padmanabhaswamy Temple, built as a shrine to the Hindu deity Mahavishnu many centuries ago. It was improved later by the ruling kings of Travancore and has remained standing for all these years. In 2011, a group petitioned the government for permission to search through the temple for unknown treasure. It was agreed that the researchers would scour the temple in search of forgotten relics and make a record of their findings. This involved breaching a series of underground vaults hidden beneath the temple. The hidden chambers had been sitting in plain sight for nearly 1,000 years, but were left largely undisturbed. You won't believe what was discovered inside. When the secret vaults were opened, the treasure found was beyond imagination. There were bags bursting with gold coins. The vaults were full of diamonds and gemstones, with enough jewelry and artifacts to satisfy even the wealthiest royal family. But they weren't all opened. 3 of the vaults were left alone, specifically Vault B, the one believed to be filled with the most staggering treasure. Vault B is the forbidden vault, and nobody is allowed to open it. It's believed that inside this vault, which remains sealed to this day, are treasures accumulated over thousands of years. The door to Vault B is carved with humongous serpents, deities, a female vampire, and other supernatural entities. Something else happened when the other vaults were opened. Priests at the temple had begged the researchers not to open the vaults in the first place because they feared that something evil could be released. A month after the doors were opened, one of the men involved in the project met an untimely demise. Priests at the temple say it's a curse. They say if Vault B is ever opened, it will unleash biblical-level catastrophes. Acrotii. For 3,600 years, the ruins of Acrotii remained buried in plain sight for all to see on the Greek island of Santorini. The ruins belonged to a city-state with such immense power, their influence stretched to Egypt and Syria. People began to live here 6,000 years ago, but after its destruction, it was lost and forgotten. Modern archaeologists didn't start excavating the site until 1967. So what's the big deal? Rumor is Acrotii is most likely Atlantis. It was an incredibly advanced port town in the Mediterranean Sea, matching Atlantis' description. They were hugely sophisticated, they had high walls surrounding their city, and they were wealthy. The story told by Plato of an advanced civilization being drowned by angry gods could have been Acrotii. At the very least, Acrotii could have inspired the story. You'll understand why when I tell you how the city was destroyed. They don't call Acrotii the Greek Pompeii for no reason. In the 16th century BC, earthquakes shook the island of Santorini. The earthquakes were so violent that people abandoned their homes and fled for their lives. Then, in an instant, a volcano erupted and buried the whole place in hot ash. The only difference between Acrotii and Pompeii is that the people on the Greek island fled before the volcano blew its top. They knew exactly what those tremors meant. Wisely, they left before they were turned into volcanic mummies. It wasn't until the 1960s that archaeologists realized the extent of the city. Now it's seen as one of the most impressive jewels of the ancient world. Nobody knows the extent of knowledge and wisdom lost with Acrotii's destruction. Out of place artifact. Vladivostok is as far as you can get in the east, and also hardly more than a stone's throw from the edge of Alaska. The Russian city is above China, just a smidgen away from North Korea and hemmed by the Sea of Japan. It was in this outpost at the edge of the world where a man named Dmitri found something exceptional. Dmitri came across a potential human-made artifact in a block of coal. Dmitri was feeding the fire when he noticed something shiny peeking out from a chunk of black rock. It turned out to be a shiny metal bar with teeth, just like the kind of teeth you see on a metal gear. It looked like a piece from a gear, but it was embedded in a piece of coal 300 million years old. The coal came from Pennsylvania. The artifact found its way to Russian biologist Valery Breyer, who analyzed it. The scientist supposedly found refined aluminum within the object. Refined aluminum is not something you're going to stumble across in nature. It's a byproduct of high technology. That means the piece of metal was made by a human. But how did it get into an outcrop of Pennsylvania coal? It makes no sense, especially when you know where coal comes from. The coal would have been formed at a time long before the dinosaurs, essentially made during the catastrophic loss of a vast forest. There were no humans at that time. But what if there was something else? What if this random piece of metal was dropped by an advanced being who touched down on the planet when it was covered in weird animals and hulking trees? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The Egyptian Coverup. What if everything the scientific establishment tells us about ancient Egypt is wrong? In 1993, scientists were already highly skeptical over the official age of the Sphinx. NBC ran a documentary program that presented geological evidence saying the Sphinx is 9,000 years old. That's twice as old as we think it is. More recently, Egyptologist John Anthony West and geologist Dr. Robert Schoch investigated the strange water erosion at the bottom of the Sphinx. They concluded after thoroughly studying the mesmerizing monument that it was most likely involved in a flood. The immediate response by officials in Egypt was to denounce the claim as pseudoscience. So what's the truth regarding the Sphinx? Are the conspiracy theorists right? Was it built prior to a prehistoric flood that destroyed a global civilization? If the Sphinx is older than they say, what's the point in covering up that information? There is a weird theory that claims that archaeologists are responsible for a vast plot to control history. The truth is hidden in plain sight, but mainstream scientists prevent the public from knowing it. The truth in this scenario being that there was a technologically advanced society 5,000 years ago who were destroyed by a flood. Do you think history is being controlled? And if so, why? Could the Sphinx be 9,000 years old? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Roman fast food. The Roman Empire was surprisingly similar to America in that fast food was everywhere. Much like fast food restaurants today, the Roman versions also had a bad reputation. They provided fast and cheap meals to the poorest of the Romans. Even though these places were scoffed at by the rich, that didn't stop them from secretly indulging. These fast food restaurants were known as thermopolia. For years, they remained hidden in plain sight. Archaeologists thought they were dealing with ordinary restaurants, but really these were the original grab-and-go venues of Rome. Thermopolia translates to English as places where hot drinks are sold. Most of the fast food joints looked very similar. There was a small room with a large countertop at the front. The countertop was embedded with jars called dolia for keeping food hot or cold. Picture going into your favorite burger place and seeing this small work area in the back with the front counter for ordering. Thermopolia were almost identical. They even had cramped dining areas where people could sit down and gobble up their meals. Prior to the destruction of Pompeii, there were at least 150 thermopolia in the city. But what was on the menu? That's what everyone's dying to know. Roman fast food joints served lentils, cheese, and probably some different types of meat. They had fish sauce, lots of nuts, and warm spiced wine. One of the fancier menu items was cheese soaked in honey. Thanks for watching! Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed. Cretan hieroglyphs. In ancient Greece, hieroglyphs were being used at around the same time that Egypt was using a similar script. These hieroglyphs were ancient characters used to represent either a sound, a word, or just a syllable. The Cretan hieroglyphs were invented by the Minoan civilization way back in the early Bronze Age. The Minoans themselves existed between 2700 BC and 1100 BC. Making their mysterious writing system one of the oldest in the world. The Minoan civilization was the foundation of the future of ancient Greek and Roman culture. Based on the written texts found on ancient artifacts, archaeologists have found various scripts. So Minoan is either an unclassified language or perhaps multiple languages using the same script. Separated into Linear A and Linear B, Linear A has mostly been found on clay tablets and consists of about 80 signs representing distinct syllables. While Linear A has been partially deciphered, Linear B remains a complete mystery. One of the reasons the hieroglyphs used by the ancient Minoans are so interesting is that they can only be found on the island of Crete. The Minoans were an island people who flourished and prospered to levels unseen by many of their coastal neighbors. These hieroglyphs have been found at a few specific places on the island, at the Malia Palace, in Knossos, and at Petras. Knossos is the most important archaeological site in Crete. Most archaeologists agree that it is the oldest city anywhere in Europe, which is quite impressive seeing that it was on an island. It appears that there's just something about being secluded that helped ancient civilizations to really blossom. The script found in Knossos dates back to between 1800 and 1450 BC. It was found written on clay documents, carved in gemstones, and left scrawled in stone. However, archaeologists still haven't been able to fully decipher it. For some reason, Linear A was replaced by Linear B in 1400 BC, making archaeologists think something drastic may have happened during this time. Right now, researchers are working hard to reconstruct the language and unlock more secrets of this lost civilization. The Singapore Stone. The Singapore Stone is an ancient relic discovered, as you can probably guess, in Singapore. It happened back in 1819 when a large boulder was discovered covered in bizarre markings that nobody could decipher. Then, in 1843, the stone was blown apart to make the mouth of the Singapore River wider. The Singapore Stone was taken and stored at the National Museum of Singapore, where it remains today. But here's the deal. Nobody knows who made the Singapore Stone or what is written upon the rock. It's made of coarse sandstone, and the original boulder, before it was blown apart, stood 9 feet high. In total, there were 50 lines of inscriptions that archaeologists still believe hold the secrets to the ancient history of Singapore. It could have been the ancient Majapahit civilization that created the rock, though nobody can be certain. The first earnest study of the rock fragment was done by the Dutch scholar Hans Kern. He allegedly deciphered a few words and was able to date the inscriptions to 1230 AD. But this is just speculation since he couldn't seem to decipher anything else. As for the Majapahit, they used the Sanskrit script between the 12th and 14th centuries, suggesting whatever was written on the stone could have been an earlier, more primitive form of the language. The Majapahit occupied much of Southeast Asia, with their empire based on the Indonesian island of Java. They disappeared around the year 1550. Chinese gold bar cipher. In 1996, the curator of a museum in the United States came across 7 gold bars from China that were given to a general in 1933. These mysterious bars have pictures, Chinese writing, some form of script writing, and cryptograms in Latin letters, making it one of the most interesting uncracked codes. The International Association for Cryptologic Research agreed to take a look at the mysterious inscriptions to see if they could figure it out. The details of the gold bars themselves are a little shaky. They were allegedly given to someone named General Wang in Shanghai. The Chinese writing is the only thing on the bars that has been translated, but it only mentions that the gold bars weigh 1.8 kilograms. It doesn't really help decipher the rest of the puzzle. It appears to be some form of metal bank deposit certificate, but that doesn't make much sense. And there's a bit more to this mystery than just the undeciphered writing.
nobody can figure out if these gold bars actually exist. For one, nobody knows which museum is holding onto them. Plus, the gold bars have 1948 written on them, but nobody is sure what the context is. They apparently were made prior to 1933, so it doesn't make a lot of sense. There are many pictures online showing the gold bars photographed against a dark background, but so far no one has been able to come up with what the encrypted lines mean. Number 7. Meroitic Script. The Nubian Empire was located just south of Egypt in what is today Sudan. The origins of this mighty empire go all the way back to the Stone Age with the Kerma culture. They were one of the most important civilizations anywhere in the ancient world. The Nubian Empire fell apart around 330 AD, with their last capital being the city of Meroe, where there are still dozens of black pyramids standing in the desert sands. But besides just being a powerful empire that built more pyramids even than Egypt, the Nubians also created what might be the first written language ever used in Africa. It's known today as the Meroitic Script. In 671 BC, the Assyrians conquered Egypt. The Kushites withdrew from the Egyptian border and established their capital in Meroe. Because of how connected Nubia and Egypt had been, they were already using hieroglyphics in Nubia. But with the arrival of the Assyrians, they realized they needed to distinguish themselves from Egypt and protect their secrets from the foreign invaders. So they took the hieroglyphics they had been using and tweaked them to create a new language, a completely distinct script that used only 23 basic symbols in the alphabet. This was probably the first alphabet system in Africa that used vowel sounds, something not even the Egyptians did. But here's how good of a job the Nubians did. To this day, scholars have yet to fully decipher their language. The Nubians wanted to create a script so complicated that the Assyrians couldn't decipher it, and it worked. The first Meroitic inscriptions were found back in the early 1900s, and now, over 200 years later, scientists are still stumped. Oldest undeciphered language. Sitting in a room at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford are clay tablets which contain the oldest undeciphered language in the world, Proto-Elamite. According to the museum, these tablets date back to before 3000 BC. That makes them over 5,000 years old. The artifacts come from what is modern Iran and were likely created during the Benesh period, when the oldest civilization ever to live in Iran began to take shape. This was in the earliest part of the Bronze Age, with the Proto-Elamite writing system probably being used for a brief time before the Elamite cuneiform was invented. Over 1,600 tablets have been found in Iran with this script on them, and yet nobody has ever been able to decipher the language. Proto-Elamite may have been used for around 500 years before true Elamite came into existence, which was then used for 2,000 years, and was even one of the official languages of the Achaemenid Empire of Persia. But the origins of the language are just as mysterious as whatever is written on the clay tablets. Some scholars believe it was derived from the Dravidian languages of southern India, like Tamil. Others say it has its origins in the Indus Valley with the Harappan civilization. But no matter where the language came from, it doesn't change the fact that even with all of the technology we have today, our best scientists still can't decipher it, and this is actually hindering them from learning more about the earliest people to live in Iran. The Thevoyich Manuscript. The Thevoyich Manuscript is a bizarre medieval codex that nobody seems to know what to do with. The manuscript is full of fantastic drawings, its pages are filled with writing in an unknown language, and every last expert who has tried to break open its secrets has failed. The manuscript itself is stored at Yale University in the Rare Book and Manuscript Library. It's a codex or illuminated manuscript made up of 240 pages, but every single one of them is filled with mystery. Nobody knows exactly when it was created or what it was intended to convey. There are images of decapitated heads, floating castles, flowers that seem to have been inspired by alien life forms, and a whole lot of nude women bathing. Even the famous cryptologist Alan Turing of the FBI was stumped when he tried to figure out what the language in the book was, and he was supposedly the best. The unknown script consists of an alphabet that has not been seen anywhere else in the world, making it indecipherable. The best theory put forth so far is that the manuscript was supposed to be a representation of all knowledge from the time gathered together in one place. As the Art newspaper reports, one theory proposed by German Egyptologist Rainer Hannig is that it is written in a Semitic language such as Arabic or Hebrew, languages spoken by European scholars of the Middle Ages. After identifying a connection between certain Voynich characters and Hebrew, he managed to translate the first words and then full sentences. He believes that the book contains botanical and medical texts, but that it will take several years to decipher. The illuminated manuscript is named after Wilfrid Voynich, a rare book stealer who purchased the book in Rome in 1912. Before that, it belonged to the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II and probably John Dee, the infamous astrologer at British Queen Elizabeth I's court. Time will tell if the German Egyptologist has finally uncovered the secrets to the magical manuscript. The Gahal Block. The Gahal Block is a writing tablet covered in strange characters unlike anything seen in Mesoamerica. The block was discovered in the heartland of the ancient Olmec people. Archaeologists have dated it back to 900 BC, and if correct, the dating would make this block the earliest evidence of writing found anywhere in Mesoamerica, though archaeologists have no idea what it says. We know that the Maya created their own language, and other cultures in the area had their own scripts, but this isn't like any of the others. There are 62 characters, and nobody knows what any of them mean. The script is also unusual because the symbols are running in horizontal rows, and there doesn't appear to be any form of organization. The sequences seem random and incongruent. Additionally, the characters show no resemblance to other glyphs used by the Olmec, leading some to speculate that the glyphs found on the stone were the earliest form of writing used by this culture, up until 500 BC, until they developed a more sophisticated language before vanishing mysteriously about 100 years later. What's bizarre is that the Epi-Olmec culture that came after, lasting from between 300 BC to 250 AD, had a fully fledged writing system known as the Isthmian script, yet it has absolutely nothing to do with the Gahal Block. Rango script. The Rango script is a form of writing discovered in the 19th century on the mysterious Easter Island. The explorer Eugene Urod landed on the island back in 1864 and discovered bizarre inscriptions carved into stone. He counted a total of 26 wooden objects covered in text that could not be deciphered at the time. In fact, they still haven't been deciphered. The symbols just don't seem to make any sense. The characters look like a weird mixture between animals and plants and geometric shapes. There are 120 of them, mainly things that look like birds. However, there are 480 glyphs in total believed to be variants of the main 120. So who created this mysterious script? These days, the people of Easter Island typically use Spanish or their native Rapa Nui language. The Rango script was used up until the 1860s, at which point all knowledge of the language and its origin was lost. The language was probably brought to the island with the original founders of the Rapa Nui, though it's believed they came from Polynesia, and no similar language has been found beyond the rocky shores of the island. In other words, nobody knows. The Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone is arguably the most photographed object in the British Museum. It's a huge stone slab with a message carved into it, written in 3 different forms of writing. It was the Rosetta Stone that allowed historians to finally decode ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics. This is because the same message is written on the stone in different languages, in hieroglyphics, Demotic, and Ancient Greek. At the time it was discovered in Egypt by soldiers in Napoleon Bonaparte's army, nobody knew how to read hieroglyphics. But by comparing the Egyptian with the Greek, seeing as the exact same thing was written in both languages, experts were able to figure it out. The stone was found at the city of Rosetta sometime between 1798 and 1801. After Napoleon was defeated, the British went ahead and kept the stone for themselves and put it in their museum. The writing on the Rosetta Stone is a decree written by a council of priests on the anniversary of the King Ptolemy V's coronation in 196 BC. It was basically them saying that they support the new king and so should everyone else. And even though the Rosetta Stone has been fully deciphered, it's still considered by many to be one of the most mysterious relics that's ever been successfully decoded. The Pyramid Texts. The Pyramid Texts are considered to be the oldest religious writings in Egypt, and possibly the oldest sacred texts anywhere in the world. Egyptologists for a long time have believed that these texts, which have been found scrawled on the insides of tombs, on the lids of sarcophagi, and even on the walls of pyramids, are ancient spells. They date back to the Old Kingdom, with the oldest of them being made in 2400 BC. That's nearly 4,500 years ago. The texts are easy enough to decipher since they're written in Old Egyptian, but it's their meaning that has scientists stumped. The texts were originally put inside the pyramids of kings and queens. Then, during the Middle Kingdom of between 2055 and 1650 BC, they weren't written in the pyramids at all. Finally, in the era of the New Kingdom between 1550 and 1070 BC, the text showed up in the tombs of officials, not kings. Nobody is really sure why the use of the pyramid text changed over the years, but the purpose likely remained the same. The texts were probably spells meant to enable the transformation of the dead, so that when they reached the afterlife, they could mingle with the gods.
Thanks for watching! Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed.
Judgement and the Underworld. If you've ever wondered why the ancient Egyptians went through so much trouble with their dead loved ones, meticulously turning them into mummies and then burying them deep inside burial chambers, it was because death was just a temporary interruption. Life would continue in the beyond, so it was important to have everything you loved and needed with you. The ancient Egyptians believed that when a person died, their spirit would travel through the underworld to meet the god Osiris in the Hall of Final Judgment. It was here where they would plead their case as to why they deserved to be allowed into the afterlife. Osiris was king of the underworld, and he was in charge of judging souls. He was also believed to be a benevolent god and introduced humans to agriculture and wine. He was associated both with death and fertility, with the Egyptians even believing he was once a living king who had been miraculously resurrected after his brother murdered him. Anubis can also be found in the underworld, as he was the god of mummification and helped protect the dead while on their way to the afterlife. Once in the underworld and face to face with Osiris, a dead person would meet 42 divine judges. It was in front of all of these entities that the dead one would need to plead their case. But no matter how fiercely they pleaded their case, it all came down to the weighing of the heart. This was a ceremony in which the ancient Egyptians believed their heart would be weighed against a feather taken from the goddess Mat. If the dead person had been virtuous in life, the heart would be the same weight as the feather. If they were found to be evil, the heart would be heavier than the feather. If found to be bad, their heart would be fed to Amit the devourer, and their soul would be cast into darkness forever. The Ubaid alien figures. The Ubaid alien figurines are either proof that reptilian overlords had great influence over our ancient ancestors, or that ancient people really liked depictions of lizards and honored them as their gods. The figurines were found at the Al Ubaid archaeological site, built 7,000 years ago by the Sumerians. The Sumerians were one of the first major civilizations in human history and left a large legacy behind written on tablets and carved into sculptures. What's really strange is that the figurines clearly depict humanoid figures that seem to be hybrids of both humans and reptiles. Some believe the figurines are the depictions of alien monsters that came down from space and provided secret cosmic knowledge to the Sumerians. This knowledge allowed them to blossom as a society and push human civilization forward. Others believe the figurines are simple representations of reptilian gods dreamed up by the ancient Sumerians that came from their own creation stories and legends. Which one you believe is totally up to you. The Ubaid period lasted between 5,500 and 4,000 BC, to the very beginning of civilization as we know it. The figures were excavated in what is today modern Iraq. According to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, they were made using baked clay and show both male and female reptilians, all of which have lizard heads. Some figurines hold staffs or scepters, with females holding babies. Each was modeled in its own unique pose, and they all appeared to be wearing some kind of shoulder armor. Coincidentally, the figurines were carved at the exact same time that villages began taking shape across the region. People stopped hunting and gathering and began building great monuments as well as irrigating the land to farm. Could a race of humanoid lizards really have been responsible for this sudden advancement of civilization? Alien astronaut theorists say yes. The Evil Eye. An ancient magical amulet was recently turned over to authorities in Israel after being in the possession of a family for 40 years. According to Live Science, the amulet is 1,500 years old and was once worn as part of a necklace. The amulet is made of bronze and is inscribed with magical symbols meant to protect against demons, as well as the curse of the evil eye. At the time the amulet was made, the Eastern Roman Empire was in power. They ruled from their capital Byzantium, what is now Istanbul in modern Turkey. The amulet was found buried near an ancient Jewish synagogue by some locals and was kept in their home as kind of a souvenir before just now being given over to the proper authorities. The amulet suggests Jewish people at the time may have worn these magical pieces of jewelry to protect themselves from evil, specifically the curse of the evil eye, which was a widespread belief going all the way back to the 6th century BC. Some of the earliest Jews believed that magicians were able to ruin their life with a curse by simply giving them an evil glance. This is where the term evil eye comes from. Any magician powerful enough to cast the curse could cause their victim to suffer injury or great misfortune if they didn't have a magical amulet to protect them. Divine visions. The Oracle of Delphi was one of the most powerful women in the ancient world. In ancient Greece, a civilization dominated by men in the highest positions of society, she had a shocking amount of influence. This is because the Greeks believed that the oracle could see into the future and needed to be consulted before any major decision was made. What a lot of people don't know is that Delphi is in fact a Greek city and one that still stands today, but it goes so far back that the lines between myth and reality are a bit blurry. Zeus allegedly named the city after it was liberated by the god Apollo, who killed the giant serpent named Python who guarded it. After the serpent was killed, its body fell into a crack in the earth and fumes spewed forth from the rotted carcass. These fumes are what gave the oracle her power. When she inhaled the fumes, she would fall into a violent trance and proclaim her divine visions. The people who settled here first built the legendary Temple of Apollo, and men from all over Greece in positions of power sought the oracle's advice. She would tell them whether they should go to war, when they should plant their crops, and even what decisions to make in local government. There were different oracles throughout the years, with each one being specially chosen from the Temple of Delphi to fill the role. These women were called Pythia, and they, for all intents and purposes, made some of the most important decisions in Greek society. Flocks of llamas. Rock paintings in the Atacama Desert of Chile have revealed some secrets of a very ancient desert culture. These paintings are located in the Taira Valley, which archaeologist José Bereguer says is one of the most important ancient places anywhere in South America. It once held great astronomical importance to the locals and was a place of worship for the llama shepherds. In fact, the local shepherds were the ones responsible for the rock paintings. They drew a bunch of pictures of llamas in the rock about 2,800 years ago. The shepherd would then visit the llama drawings as part of a ritual to ask the deities that ruled over the skies and the earth to please increase their llama flocks. This curious ritual goes to show just how important the llama was to the ancient people who lived in the desert. The paintings can be found over 9,800 feet above sea level, and so it was quite a pilgrimage for the shepherds to reach this place. But because it was so close to the sky, they believed there was a better chance of them being heard by their gods. And now for some Maya snake kings. But first, want to give a big shout out to Marshmallow X Cream and Gabrielle Lynch. We wouldn't be here without you. If you want to see more videos like these, be sure to hit that subscribe button and join us. Mayan snake kings. Archaeologists in Guatemala unearthed 2 secret Maya tombs beneath a pair of Maya pyramids that they say could help shine some light on the mysterious snake kings that once ruled the region. The tombs were discovered 300 miles from Guatemala City in the ancient ruins of Holmul. People were buried inside the tomb somewhere around 700 AD, right around the time that the Maya civilization mysteriously collapsed. Inside the tombs, archaeologists found strange artifacts with direct links to the little-known Snake Kings. They found a snake head emblem, teeth made from jade, a human tibia inscribed with strange writing, and a sun god pendant. These artifacts are all associated with the House of the Snake Kings, kind of like the ruling houses in Game of Thrones, that ruled a vast area of what is today Guatemala. One of the tombs contained the body of a man who died when he was middle-aged. His teeth were inlaid with jade, a symbol of Maya royalty. In the other tomb, a jade artifact was found with an inscription that read, Yuknum Ti Chan, Holy King of Kanul. These were both members of the mysterious House of the Snake Kings. They had their capital at the city of Zibanche, about 100 miles away from Holmul in Mexico. Archaeologists believe this secret house exerted power over a huge chunk of Maya territory and probably warred with the rulers of Tikal. They also believe that Tikal eventually toppled the house of the Snake Kings, perhaps leading to the abandonment and ruins of their city in Belize. Grandfather Crocodile. The origin story of the Southeast Asian island nation of East Timor is shrouded in myth and secrecy. It's said that the island of East Timor was brought to life by the grandfather crocodile, which is why today the crocodile is a revered animal on the island. The story goes that a little boy rescued a crocodile and became friends with the reptile. They traveled the sea together, but one day the crocodile died, and it was then that East Timor formed from the croc's body. The legend goes back hundreds of years, but is still believed today in many parts of the nation. In fact, belief in the grandfather crocodile coexists with Catholicism. And amazingly, this reverence for crocodiles has created a totally unique situation in which these animals are protected by law and pretty much worshipped by the locals. The biggest telecom company in the country has crocodiles on their logo, so does a soccer team, and there are even rituals that involve sacrificing pigs to saltwater crocodiles to appease the great reptile god. Churches built by angels. The rock-hewn churches in Lalibela, Ethiopia are believed to have been made by angels. 800 years ago, King Lalibela of Ethiopia ordered a new capital to be built at this place for devoted Christians. The city was built 8,000 feet above sea level on the central plateau. It was around this time that the 11 churches were carved from a single monstrous block of stone. Not a single brick was used in their construction. There was no lumber needed. And even today, scientists don't know much about who exactly built them. Archaeologists are confident they were simply carved from the huge piece of stone. But the faithful locals still believe the churches were built by the angels. And this is backed up by what the Ethiopian Orthodox Church says. This doesn't come as a big surprise when you take into consideration that Ethiopia is one of the oldest Christian kingdoms on the planet, becoming devout even before the year 400. King Lalibela lived around the year 1200. One of the reasons the churches are such oddities is that there were easier ways to build things back then besides carving buildings out of rock in the earth. To explain their seemingly miraculous construction, the church came up with the theory of angels, and it's stuck ever since. Celtic princess. A grave was discovered along the Danube River, and it may belong to a woman who was a real Celtic princess. In more modern culture, Celtic princesses are seen as mythical women who had magical powers. And believe it or not, there may be some truth to this. The large burial contained the skeleton of a noblewoman who was clearly very wealthy. It was found near the city of Hünberg in Germany, with the grave and everything inside it incredibly well preserved, thanks to the waterlogged soil. The burial chamber itself was built of wood, with an oak floor still intact. Archaeologists were able to date the trees used to build the tomb, finding that they had been chopped down 2,620 years ago. This means the alleged princess was buried in 609 BC. Amazingly, the tomb managed to evade grave robbers for almost 3,000 years. All the treasures that were buried with this woman were still there when archaeologists opened the tomb. Seeing how important the discovery was, archaeologists actually transported the whole thing back to their lab using heavy cranes. The tomb weighed roughly 80 tons. Inside of it, they found pieces of gold, bronze, and amber jewelry. They also found that the woman was buried with a child, but they haven't been able to figure out if the child was related to the woman or not. As for the princess part, this allegation is based on the amount of treasure found in her tomb. She's the closest thing archaeologists have found to the mythical Celtic princesses, though they still don't know her name, what role she played in society, or if she truly did have magical powers. A history of witches. Speaking of magic, have you ever wondered where witches came from? We know people were scared of witches up until just a few hundred years ago, but where did it all start? Nobody knows exactly when witches came on the scene, but the earliest written mention of a witch is actually in the Bible, believed to be written sometime between 931 and 721 BC. The story in the book of Samuel is about King Saul having to seek out the witch of Endor to summon the dead prophet Samuel's ghost to aid in defeating the Philistine army. There are other mentions of witches in the Bible as well, specifically in the Old Testament where it's written, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." But it wasn't for another 1,000 years until witch hysteria gripped Europe in the middle of the 1400s. We all know the stories of witch hunts and burnings, with an estimated 80,000 alleged witches being put to death between 1500 and 1660 in Europe. The hysteria began with the publication of the book Malleus Maleficarum, written by two Germans in the year 1486. In the book was a guide on how to identify and interrogate witches. It became wildly popular across Europe. Almost immediately after the book rose to popularity was when Europeans began hunting down and burning women for consorting with the devil. Thanks for watching! If you'd like to see more videos like these, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more. See you soon! Bye!